Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to this morning's episode. The title is The Mere Awareness is the Stranger. And so I have to begin because the mere awareness is a way, every person uses language differently, but the way I'm using the terminology here is that by mere awareness I mean awareness of another sort of reflection that is outside of, in some sense, the common of the light, looking at its shadow and the shadow being aware there is light. So pretty much this whole episode was inspired out of me kind of noticing that when a person looks at their shadow, they cannot see who they are, do you know? And when they turn around to see the light is so blinding that you can't see it. So it's as if it's kind of like good and bad are like a U, like the letter U, like a capitalized U. At the edge of the spectrum of the good and bad is in some sense the extreme. So what I mean by that is that the worst thing is unimaginable and the best thing is unimaginable, and we have access to the levels before that and between that in some sense. So anyways, this idea of the stranger, you see, human beings, they have been curious about their own existence, but they have also been curious about the existence of the world and its nature. And if there's a chance that the nature of this world is multidimensional, then in some sense the many ways that we feel we know things are going to in some sense shatter, they're going to break. So in some sense, guys, here's the kind of, I guess, sequence of thoughts that I'm following. First, I looked at my shadow. I noticed I can't see the light, but the shadow doesn't have a face. I looked at the light. I noticed I can see something, but I cannot see what it is. For example, when you look at the sun, its light is blinding. You can't look at the sun too long. Do you know? So in some sense, when light enters the eye in an extreme way, it kind of goes out of conception. And when light the person looks at darkness and goes towards darkness, they go out of conception. So the common denominator between the ultimate good and the ultimate bad is their inconceivability. So in some sense, noticing the shadow and the light are inconceivable, and the only thing, like I don't know, like this idea has more significance in my mind than I have shared so far. Let me see how I should share this. Pretty much for me, the fact that human beings are self-aware in a unique way is the most sophisticated, most advanced thing. When you look at the difference between the human species and other species, yes, we can see a descendant into the chimpanzee through evolutionary biology, but there's also unknown elements. For example, the difference between animals and humans is that humans are aware of their mortality. Why are we, out of all the creatures of nature, so precious and blessed to be aware that we die? Do you know? And so what I mean by that is that there is a sort of unique, an unknown, a mystery to our knowledge. That it's not mysterious when you look at what we know, but in some sense, all that we know is hovering in the unknown. So for me, in this world, there's more mystery than there can be resolution and clarity. And for now, we have access to human phenomena, human ideology, human identity. There's no saying how intensely the constitution of the inner realms, your subjective realms, may change in the future. You know, imagine in the future, like actual aliens are immigrating to Earth, and so people have to, in some sense, even be nice to what do you call it? Um, an extraterrestrial. So in some sense, I feel as we progress through time, it is very common to notice that as different eyes open, they have an influence. They have a sort of push or pull that they do. They have a sort of pressure on the system. First question: is reality more than the visible? If the answer to that is yes, then the second question comes: could that more than be multidimensional? So, first question: is there more than sensory perception? If the answer is yes, we're asking the second question: is it multidimensional? Does that mean, does it deviate from a singular dimension's comprehension or understanding? That means the multidimensionality of a rainbow and the multidimensionality, for example, light beam going into a prism and leading to the color spectrum, and the multidimensionality of an onion or a Russian doll are different. You know? Even the next question, I would even say, we can say, first question: is reality more than the visible? Second question: could that more than be multidimensional? Then the next question: is that multidimensionality alive? Is that multidimensionality alive? Then I would say the fourth conclusion: what would that multidimensionality mean? So I would say this is a kind of good model to kind of wonder about where we go from the visible. Because what we know, we know. So technically, every human being is drawn to the unknown. So at some point, life is no longer about measurable quantities. It's not even about precision in symbol attribution of a subject and an object. After some point, it returns back to the mystery. That means if you just think about it, for example, you're driving and suddenly, let's say your eyes close. Let's say somebody's driving, do you know? And the person suddenly falls asleep for a second, for like 10 seconds, and then the car shakes and suddenly the person stands up. Not stands up, like the person becomes alert. So in those couple seconds where the person was suddenly asleep, and the moment where the person woke up, because of that gap of not being conscious of the activity, the mystery is evoked. So anytime anything is interrupted, the mystery is evoked. The mystery is in, uh, yeah, pretty much that. Like what I'm saying is that it's like there's a momentum towards expression. That means when you look at human life, let's just forget what, like imagine like a really out of this world view would be to kind of like from our skies wonder what the planet is doing. I sometimes very like just as in my inner realms, just kind of stare at myself from the sky, you know, but not like literally. I'm saying like in my inner realms, I wonder, I evoke the vision. I let the idea project, in other words. Jacques Lacan said, I believe it was Jacques Lacan, he said, one of the most significant moments in a child's life is when it sees itself in the mirror. That means that moment when a person looks in the mirror, they are seeing the uh, simultaneous experience of inside and outside of themselves. So for me, I'm like, on one level, either things are being completely destroyed, either things are endlessly being created. Then there is the mirror, this mirror awareness that man suddenly could be a witness of his own existence. This was like the most fascinating thing, really. The mystery of how existence knows itself. That means it's like our lives are kind of like having access to, it's like seeing just one part of the engine of the cosmos. I don't know how to say it, guys. I'm just simply like, sometimes it's very interesting because a person is not just senses, the sensory perception, and you're not just stuff, you are how stuff is happening in a certain way. That certain way is unknown. In some sense, like the uniqueness, it's kind of like every person is gifted with their DNA. It's as if the DNA is strangely like a seed planted in the soil of time and space. And it's as if the right conditions in space and through the endurance of time, in some sense, the entity forms. So I can say time and space are the parents of the soul. Yeah. And guys, this is some next level. I'm pretty much saying, imagine if time and space were a couple and their child was a creature, or let me say a being, a presence, a soul that could witness beyond time and endlessly move in space. You know, I am just waiting for parallel thinking to hit the educational system. It's been so long and people haven't said anything for so long, it's ridiculous. Do you know? If you ask someone what is an advanced system and they say an advanced system, they give you an image of it, you will eventually realize any system that doesn't continue to update is a lost system. That means it's like you gotta dress for the weather or you'll freeze. And sometimes I feel human beings, their attitude is how they dress for the weather of their inner realms. So, anyways, that moment when a child looks in the mirror, that's a very important moment. It's the moment where an image of self is being accepted real. It's technically a sacred moment. That moment when you look at yourself in the mirror, I'm saying that early moment in the child's life. where the child looks in the mirror and sees for the first time everything else it has been identifying not as itself, but what it sees in the mirror is an image outside of itself that it simultaneously accept. That means it's like it's very interesting. It's like this. It's very easy to, like, how can I say it? Like, on one angle we can doubt God, but on another angle we are based on faith, accepting our reflection in the mirror. Do you see? It's kind of strange because the more the system either speeds up or slows down, it stops relating to a set time. So what that means is, I'll give you this example. I've had this experience where I've been in a chaotic moment, and it was a situation where, how would I say it? It was like, it was a situation where my mind moved first, then my body. And what I mean by that is that I moved my inner realms before I actually physically moved. I moved my inner realms quicker than that situation, and I got out of it. That means that there are times where it's I think it's all about sensitivity. It's all about realizing you are a living being. And what does that mean? That means there's certain moments you can interpret, and certain moments, like in deep sleep, what are you going to do? Do you know? Can you find a person in deep sleep? You're not a personality. So that's the mystery. For me, it's not just the archaic revival, it's the mysterious revival. Pretty much mystery, novel. We are becoming more sophisticated in acknowledging novelty. Therefore, this is strange, guys, but pretty much the more we endure through time, the more crystallized our meaning becomes. And that's its own gift. That means just being alive is the gift of seeing how long, like, just not how long, just like, where is it going? You know, the unknown can for some people be an abode of contentment, but for some people it can in some sense be that missing piece to the puzzle. You know, after a while, there's no such thing. The idea of the teacher and the student thing becomes so ridiculous. After a while, it just becomes explorers who are alive for a little while in a universal sector. That's what it becomes. I'm telling you, it's even Galileo knew this. He said you can't teach anyone anything. You can just make them realize it within themselves. What does that mean? That means you can't interest people into concepts, but you can talk about the context. You see? That means it's not just it's like, if a person, here's the thing, it's like speaking about cars. Imagine you wanted to teach someone about the mechanics of a car. Okay, if you just went into saying the speaking numerical language, the person wouldn't care. Do you know? So there comes a certain situation where you first make the context important. And the context is, it's like, hey kids, imagine like you're teaching like mechanical engineering to kids or something. You'd be like, hey kids, you know, have you ever wondered how, it's like, do you kids like fast cars? And imagine all the kids are like, yeah, we like fast cars. And in that situation, then the person suddenly turns around and says, do you want to know how to build one? And then all the kids are like, yeah. And then they have accepted the context, the spirit of the moment. And then they can easily be a concept or allow their views to change or whatever. So, anyways, guys, self-awareness is a sort of mind looking at itself, mind being a mirror of itself. That means anytime eyes open and it is not clear where they are, it means that how can I tell you? it's either like in one manner, yeah, it's either endless stars and galaxies, it doesn't end, or or instead of interpreting it as endless stars and galaxies, it's as if there is a process. It's kind of like after some point wondering if the universe is breathing, not just you. That means it's like, how does a universe change? The fast way is through your inner realms, the slow way is through the outer realms. So I feel any human being who ever looks in the mirror at anytime there's the attention goes on how the self is being awareness simultaneously as it's being a self. Anytime the attention goes there, that I call this. Here I've coined it here as the mirror awareness effect. Okay, but this mirror awareness effect is in some sense of an unknown cause. So I'm saying there's this chaos and order are endlessly fighting, but while they're fighting, we're wondering what else is happening on the battlefield. And that's the uniqueness of how we can be aware of ourselves, but not as a shape. That means right now, I'm looking at my body, right? I'm physically looking at my body, and the explanation is all right, you got a brain, neurons are busy, light is entering your eyes, and this is the body you see. Now, this question got an answer, and the answer can be accepted through a secular context. But what if there's a second question? Who is aware that I am aware of my hand? It's like, it's literally like a number to the power of itself, or to the power of an infinity. That means, in some sense, I'm saying it has no shape. It's just sight as space. So the mind is being embodied and disembodied simultaneously. So anything that's a mystery to the conscious mind in the subconscious, it could be known. I feel the only way the collective behavior of 8 billion creatures on a rock in the middle of nowhere can, in some sense, update is only if we care to first, uh, like, how can I say it? Even though people are living on Earth, many people in their inner realms, they're either looking for the future to go into some heaven, or they're just escaping into meaninglessness, nihilism. So for me, it's like a system. There's a sort of balance to it, and it's never like 50-50, but it kind of like wavers. So what that means is certain times, when you look at history, like caveman, it was incredibly unknown for them. reality. Even though they were in the world, they couldn't see the vastness that we see. So we in the year 2020 were like, yo, the caveman missed out on so much because it didn't have the evolutionary brain at the time or the sophistication at the time. The biological existence is very cool. It's just doing its own thing. It's like your mind is how you are being part of nature right now. How you're aware you're a natural being. That means there's a strange sovereignty. It's the mover of attention. So you can say the mover of the body is the phenomenology occurring neurologically in the brain, but how the neurons move, why they move, I think it's from a different sort of administration. That means it's like, well, we're not ignoring evolution, but we're wondering if we're a multidimensional being, and our evolution is our remembrance of it, right? So it's as if like the seed of it. I'm thinking, what if human existence is like a seed, again, and in some sense it has sprouted in this form this far. We have no idea what the fruits of the future are going to be. The coin flip is between the continuity of existence or the continuity of experience. It is very real that you like what is the lifespan of the human being? Let's say 100 years. 100 years you're alive, physical. That means you can navigate this body 2/3 of the day. Just the awareness to awareness is such an inconceivable notion. Like if you tell someone, imagine like uh imagine a cloud shaped like an elephant. They may be able to easily do it. Now tell them, imagine the mind before you were born. Imagine a mind before you were born, and you see there's no image to it. There was this philosopher, Michel Foucault. I've spoken about him sometimes in these talks. And he, in some sense, has this idea of the episteme. And of course, his definition of it was so precise to his own inner realms, Michel Foucault, that anyone attempting to kind of give it a definition will never stay true to what Michel Foucault saw. But here's what I took away from it. I can say that it's kind of like Michel Foucault is looking at the scientific community and he's saying, while you guys are doing this, you are in like the conscious mind of your paradigm. You are in the conscious mind of your paradigm, you know? And so there is the unconscious mind of your moment in history. Do you see? And so that unconscious mind is, in some sense, it could technically have an implication that stresses beyond the analytical progress of the knowledge. You know what that means? That means like we created language and we've taken it seriously only to realize we set it in motion in our minds. You see, there's a view where they say if they make you ask the right question, the wrong question, they don't have to worry about your answers. That means if your attention doesn't attempt to be multidimensional, it most likely will get devoured by the imagery of a singular dimension. It could be said that multidimensionality is a faculty of experience. On some level, we could all feel we're a simulation from some other inconceivable place. Like in one of my science fiction works, I had kind of suggested that it's like we think we're on Earth, and we're kind of, sending rockets to the moon and whatnot. But at the same time, like in my sci-fi novel, I wrote all of this was a simulation from the moons of Jupiter. That means the moon landing on Earth was a simulation on one of the moons of Jupiter, what the people were doing there. And I was just being playful in my science fiction effort, but I was just saying it can become that inconceivable. So for me, man is returning to nature, but he's returning like a son who left home and is coming back, and nature hasn't seen her son, for example. Do you know? For me, I kind of looked at it and I'm like, wait a minute. The fact that we're just temporary beings, like right now, it's a different day than it was yesterday. So yesterday just popped its head and kind of spoke, and then it went, and now it's like a new day. Do you see what I mean? So our relationship, strangely, it's kind of like we are a digestion organ for the sensory perception, and we transform it, we process sensory perception into a stable being or identity. So you can say your ego, your character, is the aftermath of how your biological positioning is processing sensory perception, your senses. So it's as if, like, right now, my sensory perception, I'm looking at the room, I hear my own voice, I'm aware of, my own breathing, the sounds of the birds outside, so like I notice these things, but then I notice the glow of the unknown when the concept fulfills its purpose and then dismantles, when the archetype is just evoked. In a shamanic sense, they would have these ceremonies where the person would try to do something to be a sort of power. Do you know? In ancient mythology, it's kind of cool. It's as if even the gods even pray to one another. Do you know what I mean? That means even gods need friends, guys. I feel that there is no actual knowledge that we all can look at the same thing and feel it's the same thing. I think that's a kind of impossibility, because our characters are so self-generated and the DNA is different, that on some level, like these 8 billion creatures, they're each eight, like imagine a soccer game and it has 8 billion players in it. Now, these players are playing a soccer game where they don't know the rules. They're like, while they're playing the game, they're creating the rules. Do you know? For me, a human being can become a pilot of this plane of existence if they become content with the most simplest way the moment is, and they can become content with the most complex way the moment is. And the moment you become content with the simple, you have the endless endurance to go towards the complex. That means when you open a door, open a room, see it's empty, you get out and go to another room. You don't stay in an empty room. And sometimes beliefs, if the experience isn't updated, feel like an empty room. This is why when somebody has a sort of belief system and then they're in a community with others with that belief system, there is the joy of animating as a participant of something meaningful more out than just yourself. You see, it's like what, like the guilty man has two options. And when I say guilty, I mean just the archetype of burden. Because in a strange way, the dishonest person is having throughout time more mud on their boots than the honest person. And that mud is going to make navigation in life heavy. That means if you're dishonest in nature, like, I don't know, like I'll tell you an example. Like a cousin of mine, uh, this was in 2016 when I went back to Iran, and a cousin of mine took me to the, it was my cousin. It was two of my cousins. One of them came later, and my cousin's friend. And so we go to this kind of like fancy coffee shop that slash like shisha place. It's like there's like Iran's filled with those. And so while we were there, we started discussing about just generally. My cousin asked a question about philosophy, ideology, and whatever, and his friend was there, and he asked, and my cousin suddenly, you know how sometimes a person, like sometimes when you're with friends, you can totally know how a friend is being themselves or not, and sometimes people we're like performance oriented creatures. That means whether we like it or not, we are the background performers of people's lives. That means you know how many people I've walked past when like throughout this lifetime that they never knew me, I never knew them, but I was like part of their background image. Like the jacket I wore became part of the background of their memory of me passing that day and them passing and seeing me. Do you see what I mean? So whether we like it or not, you got to kind of realize, all right, consciousness is the stage. It's the joy of performance. And performance, most people are trying to perform for themselves, which is self-mastery. But I'm telling you, a faster route is caring for something outside of yourself and then realizing that you're actually seeing your character in the other. You know what I mean? That means it's like, have you noticed that like people in different cultures, they don't just speak different languages, they have different tastes. Like the gastronomy, the food is different even. And what does that mean? That means ethnocentrism means you have your own taste. You have your own style. It's like you know what I mean? So that own style, unless you wonder about what it is, what your intelligence is, you'll never open the box to see what the gift is. Do you see what I mean? So we are gifted with existence. It's like they ask the person, "What are you grateful for?" It's like, "Bro, I'm grateful for existing. I'm here. I'm here." It's like I definitely dodged the bullet of non-existence, guys. One of the most incredible ideas I've heard is from Vedic thought, which Alan Watts, he speaks about it as the idea of play, but in Vedanta, the concept of play, the word is known as lila. Lila means the play of inner events and outer events. That means the archetype is not you. Your attention is whatever is you. And so many people, I'm telling you, we are dressed in our problems, but we don't have many of our problems. What that means is in a certain viewpoint, the person can check any time in life you want to see if you have a problem, see if from three different angles in your life the problem is still there. You know, the mind is like it's like access to parallel dimensions of the options before you make the choice, is it not? Like our inner realms are like how the world can deviate, can change, can be directed differently, can be piloted differently. So it's kind of like looking at an environment and being like, wait a minute, could the environment also not be conscious of itself? You know, guys, when I was like 15, my father told me the story of Rumi and Shams Tabrizi. And Rumi is the Sufi mystic from 700 years ago who kind of helped Persian culture not forget its um, uh, pretty much back in the day, cities were nations were being invaded, and pretty much poets were trying to back up, like backup save, save have backup saves of the culture. So that means you don't know how many poets have had to become instant scribes of realities that were being wiped and sieged on the spot. Rumi, this kid in his like late, I don't know how old the story was. This kid who was in his like late 20s or something. And then this guy named Shams Tabrizi, this spiritual wild man, this kind of like traveling Sufi dervish, he suddenly finds Rumi reading this book beside this fountain. And this book is a science book. Now, Shams Tabrizi, this bearded kind of like sage, comes to Rumi and says, "Hey kid, what are you reading?" And Rumi looks at him and says, sees he's like this kind of savage spiritual guy who came out of nowhere. And he looks at him and he says, "Nothing you would understand, old man. This is the newest sciences of the time." Pretty much he's saying, "Get out of here, you have no clue." Like something like this. He's choosing to let his pride behave before his humility. So Shams Tabrizi takes that book from his hand and throws it in the fountain, and Rumi's like, "What the fuck?" Rumi can't believe this. And Rumi, instead of getting angry at Shams, he gets upset because he's a deep thinker and he's like, "Oh my god, this was the last science book. Like, we don't have photocopy machines. There's like like when you wrote a science book back in the day, you were like, the universe has to choose if history wants to hear about it." You know what I mean? That means we take it for granted how easily it is to share information online. I think the issue is the internet is actually an incredible opportunity, but we are in a degraded way using it. Do you see what I mean? Social media there's nothing wrong with it, of course. As networks of communication, they're like social media has an advantage. But I'm saying, imagine a civilization where every human being could come and share, literally journal. We kind of have to be like, um, it's like you remember your roots, and just to see that eventually the fruit is the next destination. Imagine a world where people cared about their inner realms. Imagine a world with 8 billion uh, Carl Jungs. Imagine human beings being like, all right, in this nowhere vacuum where a sphere is hovering, it's like we're talking about knowledge, really. For me, there's after some point, there's nothing to really study, but there's everything to explore. So if you enter a field as an explorer, you will go far in it because your questions are about the nature of it, you know. Like some questions in my mind, I know that they're not that. Like that question came the moment I noticed that, like a different idea. So think of it this way: that sensory perception is processed into an awareness of sensory perception that can move, can evoke, can generate subjective existence. So we are technically not creatures of language, we're not thoughts, but we can be in moments where we can project at individualism. Because I'll be honest, if it's literally like speech and communication is like as if imagine there's this river and the river is 24/7 happening, and it's like at night you just show the flashlight. Like I remember my cousins and my brother and some family friends when we were like, I think like, how old was I was like 14 or something, like I was young. And the family would go to our like my whole family would go drive 2 hours, like I think it was 2 hours or something, like drive, and we would go to our cottage in Karaj. So this is outside of Tehran, the city. We would drive outside, and it was like fresh air and green and whatnot. At night, we would kind of get flashlights, and all of us would go like by the river. And sometimes when you held the flashlight, like there was like five of us when we held the flashlight, sometimes you'd see an animal and only their eyes would glow. The eyes of the animal would glow. But anyways, so I'm just trying to share this imagery of, what do you call it? Like a flashlight at night on a river. So from the unconscious, there's a spotlight of conscious phenomena, and from that, the choice of character is arising. So that means we can never be language. You can never, like, if you have a thought on yourself, whether good or bad, you can never be that thought. Because that thought is a tiny percentage of what is conscious and what is the unconscious. So what you don't know is so much more magnificently vast than what you know. So technically, we are designed to endlessly explore. You know? And it's kind of weird because right now the human species, it can't be too even galactically pride because it will feel like an ant. That means the more you go towards the divine archetype, you can say meditation at its ultimate stage is becoming an avatar of knowledge, which means returning to the field of being. The field of being is the contentment. Like right now we have to practice the contentment of being individuals in a collective environment, but I feel that after the physical transition from this plane, it's going to be vice versa. It's going to be, in some sense, we are the world moving the self. That's pure being. So right now our doership, our individual activity as a moment of awareness is more real, but there can be a situation where it becomes the opposite. Imagine a world where creatures were all trying to just be, rather than from being. Like when you look at it, it's like consciousness is a property of nature that it emerged, regardless of how much extraterrestrial intervention could literally be in a sunbeam. But I'm saying, like, we're not just people who seek information. We are creatures that are moving through different formations. It's like animating, giving life to the life philosophy. Every person right now, whether you know it or not, pretty much if somebody asks you, what do you think this world is, that's technically the philosophy, a unique philosophy on its own. It's your DNA. Literally, nobody has your eyes. When you realize that, you're like, oh my God, we're all through perception like the X-Men. Everybody's power is just the uniqueness of their DNA, you know? There was this quote I came across. It was by, I don't know who it was, but the quote was, it was kind of like they would use it in certain militaristic mindsets, and it was that you must serve before you command. Now, take in this idea that many people want to get a command over their mind. You know, that means pretty much human beings, after you get all your physical desires, you're going to seek like non-physical desires. And those non-physical desires will most likely appear as seeing new formations of how you're in a formation currently. So imagine now human beings, we want an advanced civilization. That means an advanced command over various ways of occurrence. So we want like a civilization of polymaths, pretty much. And we realize that the person must enter a system, serve the system, then see the true nature of the system. Then instantaneously, by seeing the true nature of the system, they will have already made a decision, and then they would in some sense go towards the command. So most people think you have to be something, and then this something has to in some sense relate to everything else. But Mr. Within is saying, before you have to be something, you're just being. And that being really has no definition. It's like how time and space were how you sliced up a cake. Or how Einstein says um, time was created so everything doesn't happen all at once. So what does that mean? That means before time was created, everything was happening all at once. So the timeless is a multidimensional, it's a simultaneity. So technically it means if we if we have a multidimensional experience, it's a dimension where there could perhaps be more than one way a memory exists. So it's like the person thought they had past lives. No, your memories have parallel lives as well. So what does that mean? That means we truly never own anything. Energy is just being energy. It's like materialist metaphysics, and people would be like, "What do you mean materialist metaphysics?" Like metaphysics all around the world started getting angry. But what the material metaphysics is is that it is any system becomes metaphysical when it wonders about the unknown and it reaches the language threshold where conceptually it can't relate to its own progression after a certain period of time. So it's like you don't know, it's kind of like a business that doesn't know how the market is going to react. So there are some ideas that enter a system, they're incredible ideas, they instantly update the system, their value is inherent in just the design of the idea. But then there are some ideas that they enter the system and they see that they're either too ahead of the system or too behind the system or they're off with the system somehow. So that means it's like one way the business is so powerful it changes the market, another way is the business is not powerful and it is changed by the market. So the business owner has to at that point decide, all right, am I going to adjust my business like survival of the fittest business in the market? So you got to adjust your business model to the top competitor, or like should you, in sense you can say, um, just the other dynamic where you're a powerhouse from beginning. That means like it's like the genius of Elon Musk, where it's kind of like in the future it's probably going to be taught in history books, but like the genius of Elon Musk, that when he wanted to make an electric car company, he was like, okay, celebrities, everybody's looking at celebrities, celebrities drive cars. If I can make a product line of cars where people like celebrities kind of like drive these electric cars, and celebrities like become super rich, they're all trying to be like avatars of goodness and correctness and like decency or whatever, but even though they live intensely opposite of that lives, but I'm saying like that's it's the avatar. It's like you're an avatar when somebody doesn't see your real self. So technically, me right now speaking, I'm a digital avatar because I'm speaking in cyberspace. You know, so anyways, what I'm saying is that the system after some point breaks down. That means how much pressure can really this life hold. That means I consider, you know, like for me, this people might find this strange, but these talks are kind of like my journals as well, so I'll share it. For me, death is when my body's effort to remain is surpassed. That means imagine every day the action of living is like a weight. And so the person at the end of their life, they have been enduring this giant weight. And civilization is messed up simultaneously while this is happening. So it's like this even gianter, bigger weight. And so the person, it's like their physical life, like when you're young, it's an incredible opportunity, but when you get older, it's as if like you get a sense of it. It's kind of like how um, I think I heard this from Osho or something, where he was saying like the Sufi, the dervish, died after the age of 70, and only after he died he realized he was truly alive. What does that mean? That means the insight like, here's the thing, it's conditional. Right now we're experiencing a conditional reality. There is a 50-50 chance that beyond this format, it's an unconditional reality. So it's very hard saying that we are like an iceberg melting where a chunk of us is melting and we're still an iceberg in the ocean, or the whole iceberg is melting into the ocean. You know, that sort of, you know, comparative angle. Um, I remember I went to Italy, and in 2016, guys, 2016 was a very blessed year of my life. I was like, I lived in three different countries. Somehow, like, conditions worked, you know. I was writing in this coffee shop in Milan. I was there for like a day, and I wrote this idea that philosophers are strangely, or every person in history, is like their life experience can be seen as some sort of philosophical display, some sort of angle of looking at life in a certain way, you know? And so it's as if we're all sculptors and we're all painters. It's like from a creative angle, history is this giant construction project, and people are born and they can choose to kind of contribute to the advancement of civilization, or they can choose to just, chill in their own bubbles of joy or whatever, hedonistic joy, pleasure. Pleasure can occupy a lifetime. That means it's like the person, like if a person has more than 5 desires, let's say more than 10 desires, then you gotta ask yourself, like, why do I have so many desires? There was a time where I asked myself, why do I even care that I care? And then inevitably I realized it's just movement of attention before the thought. So if you're content, if you're comfortable with how you're being a moment, the whole moment, simultaneously as contents of the moment are having a relationship with one another, that means imagine like you were walking in a park and you just stretch your arms out to kind of like get a good stretch in the morning, and suddenly you saw like this eagle landed on your arm. And so you realize it's like the workout has begun. You know what I mean? Like, but I'm saying it's this massive project that it's like civilization is like this ship that really no one person is steering it. It has 8 billion people who are just contributing to its design. And believe it or not, even if you don't care about anything in this world, by just living in the space and participating in the ecosystem, you're technically having a contribution to the system. That means, like, we have to consider there's a difference between a person existing and doing nothing about the system and a person not existing who can't do anything about a system. At least there are eyes that saw. So sometimes I've looked at life and I'm like, oh my God, like I'm sitting down on paper trying to constantly see the glitch in the system of evolutionary perception, only to realize it's like, what if it's in some sense the pen of the ink can never land those dimensions on paper, you know? It's like you get to see the cloud, but you can't be on it. You know what I mean? You have access to the vision, but you can't be that vision, because it really the ultimate. If somebody came and let's say I was just like somewhere and somebody came and asked me like, Mr. Within, what's the most ultimate state of being or vision? At that moment, that question would be so uncommon that I would instantly answer. You know, and for me, I would say the ultimate is really the contentment with the inconceivable, that is an experiential remembrance that all that is visible and observable is part of a changing picture. We are snapshots. We are like a belief. It is like taking, like pausing a film, taking a snapshot of that scene, and thinking that the whole film is that scene. That's what a belief is. It is ignorance of the greater dimensions at work, potentially. I sometimes would get existential panic attacks. And I've, like, in my whole life, I've had like three, but they're such rare events that they're like, and these existential panic attacks, it's like, in one way, a person, if they just see their personal life, yeah, you can find endless things that you're not content with. But like, When you think of an existential panic attack, that means the person is looking at existence and suddenly there is something that is not compatible. It's like you can say an existential panic attack is when you realize the difference between your inner realms and your outer realms suddenly. And for me, that existential panic attack was just this inevitable acceptance of the inevitable, really. You know, guys, I'm going to read some quotes from Oscar Wilde. I don't know why, but I felt like sharing some quotes from him. I think he has some nice quotes about like character, human character. I think he says, let me see. Because, guys, if we treat the human being as a multidimensional being, that means to every personality you see in someone, there is endless variations based on how their free will can move, of how they will be a person. You know, this is why they say yesterday's enemy is tomorrow's friend. Yeah. All right. So, guys, let's just go into a quote tunnel with this guy saying, "To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all." um, he says, "You don't love someone for their looks or their clothes or for their fancy car, but because they sing a song only you can hear." Fancy car? Were cars there at his time? Oh my god. The internet could be letting us down right now. Anyways, guys, he says, "Be yourself, everyone else is already taken." He says, "We live in an age when unnecessary things are our only necessities." That means we have no greater question that we're asking. That means sometimes before wondering about what answer to ask, what answer to find, wonder about what question to ask. That's what I'm saying. Like, we're no longer in a phase where one answer can rule them all. What is this, like Lord of the Rings of belief systems? It's like we're in a situation where we have to prepare for a multidimensional realization of human nature. That means, think about it this way: your ancestors, they thought they were just one person. They thought they were just one person. But we currently, right now, by having access to technology, there you have not only yourself in regards to physical existence, but you have yourself on paper, you have yourself in cyberspace. You know, if you have a picture of yourself on the wall, you have yourself on like on again on paper. You know what I mean? So I'm just telling you that we must endure, we must serve the living mystery, and then with the awareness that has not ignored the potential for a living universe, then engage reality. So one can say Taoism is another way of communicating, being a creature that is simultaneously aware of how the world is being a creature. I think that's the most ultimate awareness of nature. Because there is times that when systems that engage one another are chaotic, then inevitably decisions have to be made. When decisions have to be made, the environment already knows. It's as if like the world already knows who's leaving and who isn't. You know what I mean? Like we have to start wondering not just about it's like this where it's like we just thought we have minds. Now we're wondering what could a mind of a space or a world or a planet or a galaxy look like? Like we are reaching that phase in our efforts of wonder, you know. So the collective behavioral update really occurs after the fourth question, what would that multidimensionality mean? So first we ask, is reality more than the visible? Could that more than be multidimensional? Then is that multidimensionality alive? And then what would that what would that alive multidimensionality or dead multidimensionality mean? A dead multidimensionality means it was never multidimensional because emptiness can't be given a value. But an alive multidimensionality means that it is in some sense alive and unknown. So even if you're a materialist, if there was anything more than matter, it would appear to you as more alive and more unknown. So technically, us thinking that truth has to constantly be translated by the visibility of this dimension will inevitably be seen as ignorance. That means you can't have an opinion before you see it. Right? It's like a person. It's like a person you've never met having an opinion on it. That's like science wondering about other dimensions. Science has an opinion on. It's like if science was going on a date, it already has an opinion on what the result of the date should be and who what the other person should be, and not having access to that humanized abidance with the novel change of the moment. Oscar Wilde says, always forgive your enemies. Nothing annoys them so much. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. The truth is rarely pure and never simple. Never love anyone who treats you like you're ordinary. Okay. I mean, yeah, maybe the way he's using love, he means in regards to vulnerability. Women are meant to be loved, not to be understood. Well said. A good friend will always stab you in the front. That's true, guys, Like, dishonesty is a knife from the back, but honesty is like a knife from the front. You're just saying it as it as you see it, Oscar Wilde says, to define is to limit. There's only one thing in the world worse than being talked about, and that is not being talked about. Again, the urge of the creature to be an expression among its world. Every saint has a past, and every sinner has a future. Oscar Wilde says, I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, to enjoy them, and to dominate them. He says everything in the world is about sex, except sex. Sex is about power. Experience is merely the name men gave to their mistakes. Man is least himself when he talks in his own person. Give him a mask and he will tell you the truth. Guys, I'm pretty sure Oscar Wilde knew Guy Fawkes. Some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go. That's hilarious. Some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go. That means human communication requires a stoic prioritization of the value system. That means your behavior. That means it's like, I think efficiency is when reality is aware of itself collectively. Oscar Wilde says, I can resist anything except temptation. Guys, I gotta share this with poetry. Sometimes you find it in poetry that poetry is like that girl in the X-Men movies who could go invisible through walls. So sometimes language allows you to transform. Like think of it this way. All the verbs there are, so how would I say it? Like physically there's certain verbs that realistically relate to what can happen, but in poetry, excuse me, but in poetry the limits are taken off. What does that mean? That means I could look at this half cup of coffee and look at myself like holding this cup, like lifting this cup in the air. But poetry allows you to kind of literally like that girl with the invisibility power, like going transparency power with going through the walls or whatever, like in the X-Men. You can literally go into the foundation and core of the meme or the skeleton of the idea, and from a skeletal level shift the meaning. So I would say, for example, this would be like on the spot example, like, Mr. Within raised his coffee cup, with a might that even Thor couldn't lift his hammer. Like that's like I'm just animating that. You know what I mean? But I'm just saying the verb is not real, but it allows in imagination in our inner realms for the verb to animate. So in reality, so it's like the person is simultaneously having two worldviews. They're seeing a world that is purely object oriented, and they're seeing a world where it's how the aftermath of the sensory processing plus the abstract deviation or all the parallel options your mind can see of something before you do it. So we can say reality is one worldview, and then there is a worldview which it includes reality, but it also includes the inner deviations or extensions of reality. So you as a person, if the more you move and make noise or communicate, make sound and communicate, the more you are just in reality. But the less you physically move doesn't mean that the movement of your inner realm stops. So the mind is kind of like what do you call it? It's like the ripples of the pond. You just need to let it settle. So some people might not believe it, but like you literally have to stop. Like literally think like your phone. Like if your phone has low battery and you want the efficient decision is to have the phone endure as long as you want, so you get rid of all the applications and even reduce the light of the screen to as much as possible. Do you know? And turn off all the activities in the phone. So technically, mysticism is like the person, by becoming conscious of the program that's open, then they can close it. That means if you can't see the application, you can't press that X. You can't throw push up, tap up like the application into non-existence. So that's the thing. That's the thing. And our entertainment is not with reality. That means reality may be the truth of the physical sciences, but reality and what and um, reality's evolution through imaginative landscapes. I don't know how to say it. Like the objective realm, it's like there's the life of there's a physical life. You see that in the mirror when you look in the mirror, but there's something else that's moving. this physical life, that is more like a sight. It's like a view upon this moment and all the memories and visualization capabilities that the mind gives us access to. So we can say, when we try to figure out the mind like an object, it's impossible. This is why poetry is the furthest development, and then it goes beyond the language threshold, and then literally, if somebody wants to know what the other dimensions are, you can never fathom it from here. It's like being at the bottom of a mountain and asking someone, what was the top like? The guy's gonna be like, what do you want me to say, man? You just gotta go to the top and see it. I can't, like, at some point, the sight can't be translated into, can't be put on paper. That means anything that moves beyond duality, the non-dual will, till the end of time, appear poetic. Because our linearity is found in a dualistic system. Oscar Wilde says, anybody can suffer. Anybody can sympathize with the suffering of a friend, but it requires a very fine nature to sympathize with a friend's success. We are each our own devil, and we make this world our hell. And then Oscar Wilde says, live the wonderful life that is in you. Let nothing be lost upon you. Be always searching for new sensations. Be afraid of nothing. So that's the thing, guys. Really, you have no choice. It's like you have no choice in the sense that it's kind of like your decisions are programming how you're going to be a character in the future. So you're technically programming your conscience for the future by how you live now. And I don't know, I feel beyond this objective evolution, there's two options. Either we're going to become such an advanced civilization where we're going to become so silent, and there's going to be a sort of collective mind communication that's going to happen at that point. That means it's like, right now, we're like drops of rain on different leaves that have made cell phones and are like communicating with each other. But this would be when the drops of rain all join. So they're individual. So the evolution of the individual identity into ultimately a collective sense of being. So right now we're experiencing ourselves as like an individual. We're experiencing an individual mind. I think in the future it's going to be a very common idea that there is the simultaneity, the simultaneous life of the species. Like when they look at 2020 from back in the past, those people will see the life of the species in that moment. So I think the ultimate responsibility of existence is to pretty much every human being sharing, trying to. It's as if, imagine the human species as your friend, and you want to help it see its blind spots. You know, there's different strategies. There's one strategy is the person wants to just change the situation directly. Then there is indirect change. And indirect change means you don't change the person, you change where their attention is on, what their attention is on. And when the person's attention is away from that circumstance or condition or way of living or even elemental disposition, the person eventually changes. It's like you can wake up tomorrow morning thinking as if you have access to the purest, energized expression of reality, or you can wake up and feel like you don't even have the will. So I'm telling you, like, if your name is Will, and you stop trying in this world, it's like you failed your name. Yeah. We have to free our will from a snapshot, a picture-oriented kind of meaning. It's a film. It's an unknown film. It's like life. We tried to believe it as a known picture, a known frame, but no, it's an unknown film. It's an unknown dynamism. It's the mind is not an individual. It's a field. I find that's the healthiest way. I think most down to way, or down to earth way of explaining uh, advancements into the mystery of what the soul is really, what consciousness is really. It's as if like somehow we found a way, and we're like, consciousness, what are you doing? What are you doing in this world? And consciousness was like, you know, moving. The simplest way of accepting life. It's like when we look at an insect doesn't have a name. Like generally the species we give it a name, but I'm saying the insect, we don't care if about the individual consciousness of the creature. That means if the creature we feel is not aware of itself, we treat it as an object, which is the savageness of man's design, which will hopefully change. Certain technologies are super important to speed up. One is trying to find the ultimate health solution. That means it's like after we solve world hunger, then the question is going to be like, what food? And so I feel human beings are not designed to uh, like we can find remedies to our energy as a human being, which can totally not necessarily have to require killing other entities, animals or whatnot. It's kind of hilarious. On some level, it's like if like a vegetarian protester against animal, like against meat, eating meat, was kind of having a protest. It's wrong to eat meat. And the people were like, yo man, what are you saying? We're alive once, we do what we want. And the guy's like, no guys, stop eating meat, it's messed up. And then let's say one day an alien species comes, and this alien species is bored, and this alien species comes and sees that we are eating like animals, lesser species. And so imagine this extraterrestrial species, advanced species, in this kind of like hypothetical situation I'm projecting right now. This extraterrestrial comes and says, human beings, why are you eating lesser life forms different than yourself? And we're like, because we were hungry or we had to survive. And imagine the extraterrestrial decides to eat us just like how we ate, for example, like lesser life forms, just because they weren't conscious and they couldn't do anything about it. That means any creature that is aware or puts some effort to not die shouldn't get killed. You know what I mean? Like that means like the effort for life to remain is the biggest sign of it that it should remain, you know? So it's weird. On one level, we're like, yeah, keep the human species going, we care for life. But on another level, in regards to lesser dimensions and lesser species, and in regards to the animal kingdom, like, humans beings may be kind to each other, but in regards to animals, like on some level, we're doing some fucked up, you know, butchering. Like it's messed up. It's not even. It's like I think we've outgrown a certain savageness. But I don't know. In one of my science fiction writings, I was like, in the future, there's going to be this drink where the person just drinks this cup of juice, and it literally, it's like the energy the person would get from, let's say, I don't know, 3 meals of like the most glorious steak, that's ever cooked. Like I'm saying, the value that it's just like how you can write 2 + 2 = 4 or 3 + 1 = 4. Like you can get the same result, but from a total different angle. You know. So, anyways, guys, that's the end of the talk. I made my point about the mirror awareness, uh, the mirror awareness effect, and it's the stranger in the sense that for me, there was a time where, I mean, it still is kind of surreal that we're on a rock in the middle of nowhere, on a giant rock in the middle of nowhere. But in regards to how big the whole thing is, this giant rock is like a pebble in a light beam, you know. So I don't know. There's the mystery of how we know, and that mystery is pretty much the mystical quest. And it doesn't necessarily mean the person has to let go of everything and kind of like go become like, uh, you know, a character in a story they weren't born in. You know, it's not about per se. Here's the thing: it's like this coffee right now, this coffee cup in front of me. It literally has no value unless I choose to do something with it. And it's sometimes like there's never really a belief system. There's just symbols where the attention animates or relates to or extracts character out of. So hopefully we take evolutionary strides in the field of psychology and realize that we have to prepare for the mysteries of collective behavior and the phenomenology of in the future, probably not in our lifetime, so like in the future, uh, how to behave as a collective being. And right now we're at the point where we're experiencing how to behave as individual beings. Okay, at some point philosophers are going to be like, yo, what would God do? So I'm saying, so I'm saying, I'm saying the unknown, it's either animate or it's inanimate. If the unknown is inanimate, you wouldn't care to explore it. If the unknown is animate, then you wander beyond your own eyes, pretty much. That means it's like, what's more interesting? You know, your own voice. Imagine this. It's honestly this. It's like, what's more interesting? Hearing someone sing or you singing, for example, like how they are singing. I'm saying the experience, the more direct it is, the more you're getting from the experience. The more, and it's honestly has to do with a sense of resistance. I feel life is kind of like a river, believe it or not, guys. It's like a river. Your intuition, it's also like a river. And what does that mean? That means you could be like salmon, like sinful salmon. Trying to go above the stream, their lust is a burden for them, And then there is the view that there are fish who are like, all right, what am I doing? You know, fish that they swim with the direction of the river, and fish that go against the direction of the river, and think as if every culture, every environment, every ecosystem has its governing general rhythm. Do you know? It's pretty much like the spirit of the moment. Like, you know what I mean? That means it's like I saw it in Star Wars, guys. I'm not I have to see all the films, but I'm saying like I noticed something that when they speak about the Force in Star Wars, It's like the Jedi, the enemies come, the Jedi like kills 10 of the people like with certain acrobatic skills and lightsaber techniques, you know? And then the bad guys like the force is strong in this one. It's like, you know, that's another way of saying like it's like that guy's destined to be in the next scene. So of course the force is strong. He's not meant to end in that moment, yeah. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. This is the Q&A. I'm gonna open it up to Q&A. It's the beginning of the morning. I'm fired up. If anyone has a question or some sort of puzzle they want to share or challenge, now's the time. Yeah. Guys, there's so many questions coming in that I really don't know which one to choose. No, alright, guys, after a minute, I'm just gonna share, an ancient story, then run back to modernity. Anyone who's just tuned in, this is the Q&A uh, portion of the talk, as the giant random Q&A picture suggests in the wallpaper. Let me see, guys. Let me see if I was like a viewer, what would be a good question I could ask about the title? The mere awareness is the stranger. So I would probably ask, how do you define stranger? So awareness is awareness, it's experiential, but the concept of the stranger is the unfamiliar. So the stranger is the unincorporated yet or new pattern. So pretty much we have to update our behaviors uh, by literally living in new ways. The stranger is the unexplainable. It's the unexplainable way where the psyche is animate. So that's how I would answer my own question. Guys, I'm going to tell you one of the most philosophically profound, at the same time silliest jokes I've heard. And I'm translating the joke, but like I'm just going to tell you. This guy, just to make small talk, just asks this other person, let's say he's waiting by a train station or something. He goes to his friend and he says, or to someone, whatever, it's like a person in the story. He goes to this person and he says, "Hey man, what would you do if you suddenly, were thrown you found yourself in the middle of an ocean and a shark was there?" The guy The guy gets panics and he's like, what I would do? I would climb a tree. And then the guy looks at him, he's like, you serious, bro? You would climb a tree, you're in the middle of an ocean, and the situation is like a shark's gonna eat you in the middle of an ocean. You know, you're gonna climb a tree, you know? And the guy's like, yeah, man, I'm gonna climb a tree. And then he's like, why? You know, and he's like, you don't get it. I have no choice. I have to climb a tree. And the joke, it's on, like it's a silly joke, I know, but but the person's inner realms were the interpretation of the outcome rather than the actual outer realms. Sometimes there's no problem, the way we look at it is the problem. That could be the case too, you know. There's a reason they would say, like, the mind can be a great friend, but it can also be an enemy. Your mind can lead you towards the destructive and also the constructive. But also the world is also has its movements as well. That means anytime like I'm pushed, I just stop and I scan. You know, then I move. And it took me a while. When I was younger, it was very. And of course, you can't say this as an ultimate. You know, language is the more the person becomes acquainted with the linguistic simulation, the more the person realizes that speech is art on some inner level. You know, it's art. It's literally images. Like like imagine somebody asks you, what is a word? You know, imagine an alien lands on Earth and says, what's a word? And we're like, here, check out this dictionary. And the alien's like, you're telling me one word is a bunch of other words? You know? The alien's gonna throw the dictionary to the wall. It's like, I'm getting out of this circus act, you know? But we tell the extraterrestrial eventually, no, 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 no. These words are how we translate images. Language is a symbolic translation of an image. So the way I remember and learn things is there was a time where I was just looking at words being more words, then I realized that takes too long. You gotta see the image behind the concept. And then you see the primal way that concept is active. So it's kind of like studying a system fully and then living. So I feel most people, they are maybe at above 85% they're functioning. But to, in some sense, go, let's say 90%, that 90% function has to come with some sort of new way of looking through your own eyes. That means, in some sense, the moment the person gets a sense they're a process, then how are you a personality? How are you a person? If you look at your physical body, it's not the same body as like, you know, 10 years ago. You look at your psychology, you've had so many different experiences. How can you be the same person as you were years ago? So on some level, we're changing. On another level, we are witnessing the change. The witness of the change leads to the mystical, you know. It's like what was inside Pandora's box. The person who had opened it said, "I screamed because I saw a paradox." You know? That means that's what blew our minds away. Something that was equal. The world is like this giant activity, isn't it? Like when you look at even like corporate culture, corporate person, like the personality of a business, because on some level, yeah, businesses are like bulldozers over like you know the environment, but at the same time, they are also homes to corporate culture and whatnot. So the personality of businesses, it tends to be based on the stats of the business, like how well the business is doing. But I think ultimately it's the vision that it's like what inspires the troops. Like Tyrion from Game of Thrones understood this. He realized there's people at the gate and he has to give a speech because people, it's like, you tell me which billiard ball is gonna have a greater effort, a greater push. You throw two billiard balls, imagine exactly at one another. One of them is thrown at a much higher speed and one of them is thrown at a much lesser speed. Do you know what I mean? The one that's hit with a higher speed is going to push the one that's lesser more. So what does that mean? That means armies back in the day, the general's job was to charge them up, because eventually it was a clash of tidal waves, in human form. On some level, guys, war is so savage. It's like it's literally as savage as like the caveman's club, but with metal instead. You know what? That means like sword fighting is like, metal caveman. I don't know, guys. I'm being silly, but I'm kind of fascinated how nobody has a question. It's fine. We don't need to be, we don't need to wonder about this rock in emptiness. Anyways, guys, that joke I was telling you about the guy saying I have no choice to go, I have to climb that tree. That's the thing. That's what a belief system does. It makes you not see the actual moment and have this free will bypassed by past emotional comfort. So any person who's risked comfort over novelty doesn't update. Wow, guys, we have people listening in from Cairo, Egypt, Belgium, New York. We got a slow hand clap for the creators of YouTube, guys. Whoever you are in this listening to this talk, slow hand clap for the creators of YouTube. These guys would like literally change the audience game. It's like I'm telling you, it's like that moment where some guy went on stage, did a performance, and the audience didn't like it, and the actor who was on stage was like, "Yo, it's the audience who needs to update themselves, not me." I don't know, guys. Philosophy is all about wondering how an object evolved into a subject and why. And that why inevitably will be realized to be in the domain of the free will. So the meaning of life is how you can create it. And I don't mean create it as in fact we ignore facts. I'm just saying we have an exploration is technically the generation of a new view in your mind. You know. Now I'm saying imagine a species that somehow, if right now, a time traveler came from the future and said, like, how are you guys recording your inner realms? I would say one through like visually. The other way is the only way and the most easy way is through paper, the pen and paper. Man's best friend. Of course, dogs are up there, but like it's the pen after that. You don't know how many human beings became writers because, in some sense, the empty page was like the empty universe where they were walking in. You know, well, with a sort of with the application of the free will. So your free will has access to the real and the imaginary, but the effect of the imaginary is upon the real. That means most people care how the thought affects them. They don't care how they affect the thought. Like, we're not there as a species yet to care for our thoughts. Right now, we're still trying to care for people. You know what I mean? We're trying, but there's going to come a time where we're going to care for our thoughts, and that would be a very nice, interesting time to see the educational system like rebel against its own passive ignorance. You know. So, anyways, guys, thanks for tuning in. I hope this talk was helpful. Keep writing. If you don't write, I'm speaking to your future self, so keep writing. Much blessings to those.